Morning, all. All right, so before I get into today's news of the day, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot to report on, we're going to look at the 1936-1937 season. An eventful season, one which sees the Montreal Canadiens rise up, in part because Toe Blake's a pretty good player for them. 24-18-6 record for Montreal with 54 points. They barely edge out the Maroons for first in the division. They're coached by Cecil Hart. What's impressive with the Maroons is that they're 22-17-9. They have 53 points. And this is while they're struggling financially and they're having to sell off players here and there in order to make ends meet. So, really for the Montreal Maroons, the fact that Tommy Gorman gets them within a point of the Montreal Canadiens, pretty strong track record there. The Toronto Maple Leafs, who are coached by Dick Irvin, you may have heard the name before, 22-21-5 record, 49 points for him. The New York Americans missed the playoffs again, 15-29-4 record, 34 points. They're coached by Red Dutton. They're having their financial issues as well. There's a reason I don't have Americans and New York and Montreal Maroons magnets. I generally can't find them, and they went out of business a very, very, very long time ago. The Detroit Red Wings lead the American division and end up being the number one overall team in the NHL. 25-14-9, 59 points, and they're coached by Jack Adams. The Boston Bruins, 23-18-7 for 53 points. They're coached by Art Ross. The New York Rangers, 19-20-9, 47 points for them. They're coached by Lester Patrick. And the Chicago Blackhawks, a year away from doing something kind of remarkable, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. They go 14-27-7, 35 points. They're coached by Clem Laughlin. And again, for Chicago, tough times. So for the Toronto Maple Leafs, things are looking up. They've got a couple of good young players, a goaltender named Turk Broda and a forward named Sil Apps, who would go on to become the first ever winner of the Calder Trophy. But Broda ends up being an excellent goaltender, and this is the start of that building for the Toronto Maple Leafs to being a Cup champ. Howie Morenz returns to Montreal. It starts out as a feel-good story for Morenz. After rough goes in Chicago and New York, he comes back to Montreal where he belongs. He's reunited with Aurel Joliat and Johnny Gagnon, his former line mates. They're not the same as they were before, obviously. Players get older, but it's a good story until January 28th of 1937, Howie Morenz breaks his leg in 4 places. I talked about this in the career video I did on him. That is 2 weeks ago now. And that leg break ends up ending his career. So he's told in the hospital he's never going to play again. And then the blood clotting he had in his leg from just that horrific break ends up causing a pulmonary embolism, which ends his life on March the 8th. So they have a huge public funeral for him. 50,000 plus people turn out for that. Very emotional. So the fact that the Montreal Canadiens still end up finishing first in the division, I think, is remarkable. And it says a lot for the coaching and just for the team itself. But just a sad finish for Morenz there. The NHL, in the midst of everything else, well, they've also got their financial struggles still going on. The Maroons having their issues, and the Americans. In fact, the NHL's forced to take over the New York Americans in their day-to-day. So it's not that long ago that the Arizona Coyotes got taken over by the NHL and everybody screamed, but there's definitely precedence there for the NHL taking over teams that are having their issues. So the Wings become the first U.S.-based NHL team to win back-to-back Stanley Cups. They are the third NHL team to do it, the Ottawa Senators and the Montreal Canadiens the first two. And so that's kind of you can have some bragging rights to that. So first U.S.-based team to win back-to-back. If you're a Wings fan, there you go. Put your jersey on. January 30th of 1937, Nels Stewart scores his 270th career goal. He passes Howie Morenz. So days after Morenz's career-ending injury, Nels Stewart passes him on the all-time list and becomes the number one goal scorer in the NHL to that point. March 9th of 1937, the New York Rangers gentlemanly forward, Frank Boucher, is the first to reach 250 assists in the NHL. So not only did he win some Lady Bings, he was a pretty good offensive player. November 14th, 1936, King Clancy of the Toronto Maple Leafs, he records his final goal as a National Hockey League player on a penalty shot. Toronto won that game 6-2 over the Chicago Blackhawks, and then he retired a week later. So that's a way to go out. November 19th of 1936, Alex Connell, playing for Chicago at this point, he is the first Slow down. He is the first to reach 80 career shutouts. There you go. Just slow it down a little bit. Frank Calder introduces the Calder Trophy. Basically, he buys it, and he awards it to the Rookie of the Year. So the Calder Trophy comes by its name very honestly, just like the Lady Byng Trophy does. Whoever donates it. Stanley Cup, donated by Lord Stanley, right? So, yeah, the Calder Trophy, it's Calder's trophy because he awarded it to the National Hockey League. The Maroons, in an example of a team that's having its financial struggles, the Maroons sell Hooley Smith to Boston for cash. So one of their best players over the years, and they sell him because they need some money. So that's not great. So the Calder Trophy, as previously mentioned, goes to Sil Apps of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's the first to get the trophy. The Hart Trophy goes to Babe Siebert of the Montreal Canadiens. So that's another defenseman after Eddie Shore had won it a couple of times. The Lady Byng goes to Marty Berry of the Detroit Red Wings. The Vezina goes to Normie Smith of the Detroit Red Wings. So Detroit in the midst of a pretty good era right now. First and second team All-Stars, I did it this way for today. I reserve the right to change it for tomorrow if I choose to. Normie Smith is the first team All-Star in net. Wilf Cood in Montreal's net is the second team All-Star. Your first team on the blue line, Babe Siebert of Montreal, and Ebby Goodfellow of the Detroit Red Wings, who I'm sure a million times said, it's Ebby, not Eddie. No, I'm not Eddie, I'm Ebby. I'm sure that happened. Then on the second team, you have Earl Siebert of Chicago and Lionel Conacher of the Montreal Maroons. Down the middle, first team is Marty Berry for Detroit. Art Chapman for the New York Americans is second team. On the left wing, Busher Jackson for Toronto is the first team All-Star. Sweeney Schreiner of the New York Americans is the second team All-Star. So the Americans, couple All-Stars here. And on the right side, Larry Orey of Detroit gets the first team honor. And Cecil Dillon of the New York Rangers, second team. So your leading scorer that year is Sweeney Schreiner, who does not score a point per game. It's one of those rare seasons where nobody gets to a point per game. 48 games, 21 goals, 25 assists, 46 points. Sil Apps, very close. As a rookie, remember, 48 games, 16 goals, 29 assists, 45 points. Marty Berry for Detroit, 47 games, 17 goals, 27 assists, 44 points. Larry Orey for Detroit, 45 games, 23 goals, 19 assists, 42 points. Busher Jackson for Toronto, 46 games, 21 goals, 19 assists, 40 points. As we continue to see goal scoring not being anywhere near where it's going to be once we get into the modern era. And then in goal, Normie Smith, who would end up, of course, winning the Vezina for Detroit, 25-14-9 record, 2.05 goals against. Tiny Thompson for Boston, 23-18-7, 2.22 goals against. Turk Broda for Toronto, 22-19-4, 2.29 goals against average. For Wilf Cood of Montreal, 22-17-5 record, 2.18 goals against average. So very good numbers there. And then we get into the playoffs. And in the playoffs, finally the NHL institutes best of three. They get away from the total goals, finally. But best of three, and then you still have the best of five with the two top teams, like the top team in each division. It's just weird. So the quarterfinals, Montreal Maroons beat Boston 4-1 in the first game. Boston beats the Maroons 4-0 in the second game. And then the Maroons win the third game by a score of 4-1. The Maroons win that series 2-1. The New York Rangers, on the other side, beat Toronto 3-0 before they then beat Toronto at home 2-1 in overtime. So the Rangers win that series 2 straight. It's a sweep. On the semifinal side of things, so what I don't understand is, why didn't the NHL do it this way? If you're going to give the top teams in the division a bye, why don't you have the Maroons play the Maple Leafs and the winner play the Canadiens? Boston plays the Rangers, the winner plays Detroit. I know, crazy, right? But instead, we get Montreal and Detroit. So Detroit wins at home 4-0. They win at home 5-1. Then they go to Montreal. Montreal wins both games at home. Both games by a score of 3-1. And then Detroit wins in Montreal in Game 5, 2-1 in triple overtime. So it took a while to decide, but Detroit emerges victorious. The other semifinal, best of three as well, because sure, why not? New York Rangers don't allow Montreal to score a goal. The Maroons apparently got all their goals out of their system against Boston. They had nothing left against the Rangers, who win by scores of 1-0 and 4-0 to go to the Stanley Cup final, despite being below 500. And next season, Chicago is going to win the Cup below 500. That's worthy of discussion. In the Stanley Cup, can you imagine if that happened now? Anyway, Stanley Cup final, the Rangers win the only home game of the series 5-1. And I looked it up. I don't see it anywhere. I don't see it in my historical book. I don't see it anywhere online. I know it's the circus because it's April. I know it's the circus that bumps them out of Madison Square Garden. I'm not saying that's why they lose the Stanley Cup final, but it can't help when you're the Rangers and in April you're homeless because the circus is in town. So the next 4 games are in Detroit after the first game's in New York. So Detroit Olympia hosting this 4-2 for Detroit to tie the series at 1. The Rangers win the next game 1-0. So all they need is one more win. Detroit says no. They don't allow a goal the rest of the way, actually. They win 1-0 and 3-0 in games 4 and 5 to win their second straight Stanley Cup in a best-of-5 series in that 5th game to win the series 3-2. So Detroit on the verge of perhaps being a dynasty, and for the rest of the NHL, they're trying to keep up. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We are getting very close to the original 6 era now. That starts in 1942. So the Maroons and the Americans do limp along a little while longer. And like I said, the story of the Americans, Red Dutton especially, ends up being part of the reason why the Rangers are seen as cursed over the years. So I will be talking about that when we get there. We're just not quite there yet. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.